Today, we're going to talk about how politics affects the future of our industry. And normally what we do this time of the year, we'll talk about the State of the Union, and we are going to talk about the State of the Union, but we're going to talk a little bit more broadly. And joining us today for that discussion is Doug Kantor. He is Chief Counsel for NACS, and we're going to talk about some of the things that the Trump administration will be looking at over the next few years and how that affects the convenience industry. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start out the event that was held just a few days ago. When we timed this, because this was just a few days after the State of the Union, but also it's as close as we can go to live and still record it in advance. So there are things that may happen over the next couple hours or a couple days that will maybe change this, but it is as close as we can to getting it on live. And let's talk a little bit about the State of the Union, which was a little unusual in that typically you don't have a State of the Union when you just started administration. Secondly, it was one of the longest ones, but maybe there's a couple things there that we can start out talking about. Just broad picture, what does the State of the Union this year say about the administration's potential moves that could affect convenience retail? And then we'll talk about some of the more broader things that may or may not have been in State of the Union and where that all means. So let's just start out, Doug, and just look at the State of the Union in general, and what does that tell us as an industry?
Well, it tells us a lot this year. One thing I'd note is that this year, technically, as you pointed out, it's a joint address to Congress because it's the first year the president doesn't give a State of the Union, hasn't been president that long, but Congress invited him to give the joint address. It looks similar to everybody else, but for the Washington nerds, slightly different name. That said, this was a speech where the president showed similar things to what he showed, frankly, campaigning. There's going to be no apologies. There's going to be no backing up. There's not going to be any worry about the fact that there's partisan divisions and rancor. They are moving forward on the things they want to do. And you saw Democrats in the chamber, members of Congress, let's just say not acting like you normally see members of Congress. There was someone forcibly removed, forcibly may be strong, but removed by security because he would not stop interrupting. You saw people with little signs, different messages of protest. Those kinds of things are unusual. They've, unfortunately, interruptions of some kind have become more common, and it's all a sign of really the partisan divisions, not only in government in Washington, but frankly, we have those partisan divisions among all of us as people in the United States, and they are a reflection of us. And so those kind of divisions are certainly a prelude to what we're going to see and what we can expect in terms of the functioning or non-functioning of our legislative body and administration. So
no question there is divisiveness and rancor, as you said, but it's not the worst it's ever been because if I recall, there was a time in Congress where people were banging each other over the heads with canes, and it was physical assaults, not just verbal assaults. So did I get that correct?
You did get that correct. Yeah, that was in the run-up to the Civil War, and a caning sent a member of Congress to the hospital in very critical condition. The fact that Al Green was waving his cane around did make some of us shudder. Luckily, no one was struck by it.
Yeah, and you hate to say the prelude to Civil War. So let's just stop talking about that. Let's talk about some of the big issues that have been in the news just with the Trump administration and how they might play out. Again, we're not looking at partisan-ness on this, but how does it play out in the industry? And one of the ones that we're hearing a lot right now is about tariffs. Different industries have different effects. You're getting emails from people. Here's people in the produce industry. They're concerned about avocados. Others concerned about other things. But with us, there are a couple areas where tariffs play a particular role. Do you want to kind of walk us through where those tariffs, if if they stay, at various percentages, where might they play out in our industry?
Well, a few things. One, nobody should be surprised that this president likes tariffs. He has not been shy about saying so. We have seen changes even since the joint address to Congress in the tariff policy. They were on during the speech in terms of tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Now, a couple days later, they are off for the most part with Canada and Mexico, although some remain in place. There are also increased tariffs on China, and the steel and aluminum tariffs are very significant. And so, as you note, food tariffs are a big deal and can affect a lot of folks, including convenience stores, in terms of the food they sell and the prices they have to pay. A lot of food gets grown in Mexico that comes into the United States. The steel and aluminum tariffs, there's a lot of aluminum that goes into cans of a variety of beverages that people enjoy out of convenience stores. And those prices could easily go up because aluminum is going to be very significantly more expensive. And then oil, a lot of what our industry sells is gasoline, diesel fuel, and those prices may be impacted as we go forward, depending again on are the Canada-Mexico tariffs on, are they off, where are we? So for all of this, there's a lot of price uncertainty. And some of these things, it's worth noting, even the announcement tariffs are going to happen, even if they don't ultimately go into effect, can move the market. And so we've seen some market swings in response to news and announcements that might end up being sort of false alarms, yet they do impact the price of goods.
And when you talk about the markets, you're talking about the stock markets. You're also talking about the commodities markets. And you had mentioned oil. There has been a lot of discussion with the new administration, drill, baby, drill. We need to be energy independent. There's some complications related to that statement in that it is a global market with fuel, and there's different ways that oil comes in. There's light, there's sweet, there's heavy, and different refineries are optimized for different things. Right now, we get about 4.5 million barrels a day from Canada. We get about 500,000 barrels a day from Mexico. We consume about 20 million barrels a day, so about 25% of the fuel that the petroleum that the U.S. uses every day comes from those two countries. Now, it gets complicated. There's also exports, et cetera, but that could have a potentially significant impact on where refineries get fuel, what areas of the country might be most affected, and it remains to be seen how that will play out. But it could have a significant impact as we undergo this transition to summer blend fuel.
That's exactly right. And in addition to those crude oil numbers that you pointed out, we do get refined products from Canada too, gasoline and diesel fuel. So that's part of the mix as well. And it is an interesting picture when you look at this administration's policies. Is on the one hand, these tariffs could increase prices, that could make a difference. And as you note, they are also big advocates of more oil and liquid fuels and more drilling. And certainly they are putting in place policies to try to incentivize that work and incentivize more pipelines and those sorts of things. But those projects do take a long time, and a lot of them are market driven. And so even if you have an administration, which obviously is good for the industry in terms of opening up, making permitting easier, making these projects easier, making it federal lands more available for oil production, companies are only going to invest in that if the market price of oil is high enough to justify the economics of the investment. And sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Not all of that is in the control of this administration. So they can certainly ease the road, but that doesn't necessarily mean some of that will happen. That we'll have to see what the market looks like there.
And when we talk about fuels, there's to other factors. And right now, the peak year for fuel demand in the United States was 2017, 9.3 million barrels per day. And you had mentioned, Doug, at the beginning, for nerds, for political nerds, we have this. For the fuel nerds, you have this. So peak was 2017, 9.3 million barrels a day. Department of Energy expects that we will creep up slightly. We won't hit that record. We'll hit maybe 9 million barrels per day, which is up from the past couple of years, and particularly with the pandemic. So there's a little bit more oil being used in the country for a variety of reasons, one of which is driving. And over the last few years, there's been a move to incent more EV sales in this country. There's also been a move to continue to increase fuel efficiency, which is at an all-time high. What are things that might happen related to that retailers might want to think about?
Yeah, what's interesting just in terms of oil consumption is that fuel efficiency is the much, much, much more significant driver of actual usage of gasoline and diesel fuel than EVs are. EVs are still a small part of the market. They may grow tremendously, but it takes a huge amount of growth before they are as significant a factor as fuel efficiency. But we do see, people's behaviors changing. Obviously, the pandemic meant a lot less driving. And now more and more places are saying, hey, come back to the office. That is going to affect driving and the amounts of driving. And that affects all of these numbers. In terms of policy, there's no doubt the Trump administration is moving away from EVs and moving away from some of those incentives, leaning into more oil production and more oil usage. And so that may change that aspect of it. They may also, it appears, repeal some of the fuel efficiency rules that came out of the Biden administration. It's certainly something they are reviewing and looking at. And so that may have a much more significant impact than the EV policy side of things, but all of it happening at the same time. And we really are at this point where some of the trends we've seen over the last several years could easily be reversed, at least to some extent. And that may be part of those numbers ticking up even more over the next few years.
So we're talking about some issues, and we're not necessarily saying NACS has a policy on this or that. But one of the things that when you talk to members of Congress as rules are made, modified, et cetera, is we like certainty. The markets like certainty. Retailers like certainty because they're basing decisions on not just what is happening in stores today, but what they want stores to be like 5 years from now. So with this change or disruption in the marketplace, it's something that I imagine we want to communicate about. Some other issues we're going to talk about too. The more certainty we have that this will be a future, the better stores are able to prepare. So that's one of the reasons that we want to go through these issues.
That's certainly true. The more that you know, the better off you are, and certainty helps with planning. We hear that from our members all the time.
So looking at a couple other issues, really, we talked about fuels. We talked about the overall where the administration is thinking about some issues. What about some other issues? Labor is always a big issue for anybody that has retail operations. Is there anything that we should be looking out for over the next few days, hours, months that might happen down the road?
So one, I think we're expected to see a more business-friendly administration on the labor front. The Department of Labor looking at turning over some of the Biden-era regulations that were of concern to many businesses, like having joint liability for employers when they use contractors, those kinds of things, overtime regulations that the formula of who had to get overtime pay was changed very significantly to cover far, far more workers than had been previously. Some of those things may be changed. One of the biggest things we always hear about on labor is whether there's enough labor, right? We talked a lot about labor shortages, especially coming out of the pandemic, and those got somewhat better. We're starting to hear that's becoming more of a problem again. There does seem to be some relationship, frankly, between the increased immigration enforcement and more employees not showing up for work who may be concerned about increased immigration enforcement. We're frankly even hearing that on the customer side, that some customers may be staying home more and changing their daily patterns because of that fear of enforcement. So that is something certainly for us to watch and for the industry to watch. Does that or some other combination of things mean that the labor shortage becomes a bigger problem than it looked like it was trending in a good direction?
And of course, trips for convenience stores would also be a concern based on what you're talking about with concerns about immigration reform, et cetera.
That's right. You need customers to show up.
Yes. So talked about business friendly or more of a move towards that compared to the Biden administration. Anything related to taxes?
This is the biggest year in Washington for taxes in a long time. The 2017 tax bill, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, had a number of provisions that are really important to business that expire at the end of 2025. And so this year is often referred to in Washington as the tax Super Bowl, and everybody is playing. The biggest one, a couple of things for our industry, the way that pass-through businesses, S-corps are taxed. Many convenience stores, family businesses choose to be pass-throughs for a lot of reasons. And there was a 20% deduction in your qualified business income that came out of that bill. That's super important for these businesses to maintain. The other one for every type of business is 100% bonus depreciation, so that when you invest in new assets, et cetera, that you can depreciate those completely in the first year. That makes a big difference and really spurs a lot of investment. So those are things, look, the corporate rate, there's everything's on the table in a sense in this tax year, but there are some really big ones for convenience stores.
So you talked about really big ones for convenience stores. You talked about the Super Bowl. So we have a lot on our plate in terms of lobbying, or advocacy, but our Super Bowl would probably be swipe fees. Where might swipe fees fit into the equation in this new administration and this new political climate?
So the politics are moving our direction on swipe fees. We've always had strong bipartisan support for reform of credit card swipe fees. The populist wing of the Republican Party has leaned in with us and been big supporters. You see folks like Roger Marshall in the Senate, Josh Hawley in the Senate, J.D. Vance, who was a co-sponsor of our bill. He's no longer in the Senate, can't co-sponsor the bill because he's now vice president. It's a good problem for us to have. That is helpful, and sort of pairing that with also strong Democratic support looks like we have some momentum. There was a good hearing that the Senate Judiciary Committee had last year that did provide some momentum for us. So we think this is a very good year for us, and there's real opportunity on the horizon with respect to moving swipe fee reform.
So we covered a lot of things, and that was one of the big ones. Now, that hits a lot of NACS priorities that we're going to cover, but want to spend a couple minutes talking about other things that NACS has been dragged into over the last couple months, couple days, couple weeks, couple hours, couple minutes. One of them is the elimination of the penny. President Trump, second half of the Super Bowl, decided that the penny is going to have a worse day than the Chiefs and announced that we're going to get rid of the penny. Then all of a sudden, NACS, because of some policy and some research that we've done 40 years ago, became the expert, and we had all kinds of interaction with the media. How many more coins of this or that will be used for the drawer? Amazingly, nobody had that research, so we kind of did handwritten and figured it out. Basically, if you look at 100 transactions, it would save 200 pennies. It would not add nickels, would not add dimes, and would add 8 more quarters. 8 quarters, $2. 200 pennies, $2. So it all matches out, rounding up, rounding down. That's not my question. Question is, we had that flurry, big interest for a couple days, and then nothing. Does that mean nothing, or does that mean that we could wake up on some day and it's like, oh, the penny's gone now? Where might that play out?
Well, look, one of the things that I think you're missing out on the fun part of this, Jeff, is this administration likes to keep us guessing. And that's across a range of policies. I think this is just one of them. So, we may well wake up one day and the penny will be gone. We may wake up one day and say it's sticking around like a bad penny.
Does that mean we're going to see like a 2-cent piece or something like that? That used to be, I think back when people were hitting people over the head with canes, we had a 2-cent piece and we had a 3-cent piece.
I was not aware of the 3-cent piece. I do remember the 2-cent piece. I just don't know. I would guess we are not going to suddenly have 2-3-cent pieces. If I had to guess, I would guess the penny probably just sticks around and attention moves elsewhere. But it could well happen. We could get rid of the penny, and maybe the nickel will be ascendant, and we'll all be enjoying that one instead.
So you talked about things that we may talk more about. Another one that NACS has been involved in is daylight saving time. Years ago, we were proponents of moving it to a certain time because people having more daylight hours in the summer, they're more out and about, they're more likely to spend money, and that's a good thing. Lately, we've been talking about daylight optimization, but here we are, daylight saving time is upon us. People have different opinions about what they think about it. Where does NACS stand? Well, I'll let you define how NACS stands on this. And then where might that happen with some sort of executive action or something like that?
Yeah, so I wish that we could create more daylight. That would be fantastic. We can't do it. And government can't do that either. We can shift the clock to make the daylight last longer late in the day, but not be there early in the day, and vice versa. And NACS has always been in favor, like some other businesses, of, hey, we need the daylight savings time for as much of the year as makes sense, because then people have more time, daylight after work. They tend to be out and about more. They tend to buy more stuff. That's good, certainly, for business and for convenience stores. There have been some health professionals who've said the shifting of the clocks is not good for people. They get tired, heart issues, what have you. We're not doctors, don't really know the answer to that, but that is certainly out there. Politically, there have been a number of folks also who've said, yeah, we shouldn't shift the clock. It should be daylight savings time all year round. And in particular, a number of those members are from Florida, places like that.
Mm-hmm. The Sunshine State.
They like their sunshine. Great.
Yes.
We all want it. And so our view has been, look, the more daylight, the better. We traditionally were in favor of longer daylight savings time, but we're okay with, hey, shifting the clock because that was sort of the trade-off. And some people didn't like it being dark in the morning, and we get their reasons behind that as well. We'll see where this goes. I do think if it's going to change, the most likely is that we end up with year-round daylight savings time, which would be okay from NACS perspective. We'd also be okay with it just staying the same. And even though it's easy to make fun of the changing of the clocks, there's a reason why it happens, and it may just be that inertia wins the day here. We'll find out.
So for you time nerds, I stand corrected. We cannot change time or daylight hours. We can just change when it happens. So that's a lot of NACS issues that are really significant or semi-significant. Let's end by talking about something that has zero significance to NACS. You're a big baseball fan. We're coming up on opening day. One of the other things that President Trump said is he is going to pardon Pete Rose. And big baseball fan, what's your take?
So a couple things. One is I do think this shows the political insights of Donald Trump. He is amazingly good at grabbing onto certain types of just cultural or feel issues in a way that will be popular and pushing them. And I think Pete Rose is one of those. Look, Pete Rose, from a pure baseball standpoint, of course he should be in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the most amazing baseball players we've ever seen. And frankly, if you just look at the baseball, take away any off the field stuff, it's the kind of thing that generations of fathers and sons try to communicate. This is the model of what you should be in baseball and in life. Learn to give your best effort, learn to try hard all the time, get the most out of whatever talent you have. It's fantastic. And there's a whole generation and more of baseball fans who will always love Pete Rose because of that. There was nobody else who you could just visibly look at and see, that guy's going to win because he just wants to win more than anybody else on the field. Mm-hmm. And there's really no other reason except for that. Amazing. Now, there are lots of people, for obvious reasons, who have strong objections to the off the field stuff. And I do have debates with some of my friends about this all the time. My personal view, which has nothing to do with NACS, is put all those guys in the Hall of Fame. You can say whatever you want on their plaque. You can say banned from baseball for gambling. Fine, say it on the plaque. And also say the most hits of all time, on and on and on. That's my own view, but I do think the politics of this are brilliant. And I would say, look, at this point, Pete Rose has passed away. Who exactly are we punishing? We're not punishing Pete Rose. He's gone. He does not know whether we put him in the Hall of Fame or not. But there's a lot of fans out there, frankly, who we're punishing at this point. And I think the president has looked at that and said, yeah, put him in. So I'm sort of interested to see what impact it may or may not have, not only on Pete Rose, but there's all these guys kind of in the netherworld waiting who are steroid era and all kinds of other marks against their name. Do they go in or not?
And I'm glad you used the phrase marks against their name, because the one thing we didn't cover on this, and we have, a legal expert, is Pete Rose is not in the Hall of Fame because he committed a crime. So to pardon somebody for something that, yes, there were other crimes that he committed and was convicted of, but the one on betting on baseball was not a crime. So the pardon is more of a let's talk about something than an actual legal kind of reversal of something.
Yeah, I do think at the time he did it, betting on baseball was a crime. I don't think he was traveling to the legal bookmakers in Vegas to do it. I could be wrong, but I think, as I recall, there were illegal bookmakers involved. That said, look, there's a lot of people in the Hall of Fame who were wonderful baseball players. They were not all wonderful people. And Pete Rose is not the only one, if he was included in that group, to have committed crimes. So, there's a question about how you look at those types of things. And I get it if people have moral objections, but there's a lot of moral objections. And saying someone was great at baseball, I think we should distinguish it and not say that we're saying they were wonderful people, because many of them were not.
So, Doug, when there's a Convenience Hall of Fame, you are a first ballot nominee. And for the record, you're also a good person. So that is an awesome combination. And as always, thank you for your insights on things that will affect the industry, things that could affect the industry, and things that are just flat out fun because we're a fun industry. So thanks again for joining us today.
You bet. And thanks for making it sound at the end there like you lost a bet to me. So I appreciate the comments for whatever reason they came up.
Well, if I have to pay off the bet, I'll find a legal way to do it so I don't need a pardon somewhere down the line. So thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.